Imagine a king who rules over a vast and powerful kingdom, a man celebrated for his military triumphs, yet whispered about for his unbridled lust and depravity. His name was Ethelbald, king of Mercia, and his reign was a tapestry woven with conquest and excess. But his story doesn't end on the battlefield, sword in hand, dying for his kingdom. It ends in the dead of night, in the privacy of his own chambers, with the chilling swiftness of an assassin's blade. The shocking twist? This wasn't a political rival's plot. This was a personal betrayal, an act of brutal revenge allegedly committed by his own guards. And what was the final, unforgivable sin that pushed them to murder their king? His decision to force a nun to become his queen. To understand the full gravity of King Ethelbald's story, we must first step back into the chaotic and deeply pious world of 8th century Anglo-Saxon England. This was a time of shifting power and religious fervor. The island was not a single nation, but a patchwork of competing kingdoms, Wessex, Northumbria, and the rising power of Mercia. At the center of this maelstrom was King Ethelbald, who, from 716 to 757, forged Mercia into the dominant force in the south. His reign was a testament to his military genius, securing tribute from neighboring kings and expanding his authority with ruthless efficiency. Yet this was also an age where the church held immense spiritual and political sway. Monasteries were not just places of prayer. They were centers of learning, wealth, and power. To challenge the church or to violate its sacred vows was to risk not only one's eternal soul, but also the wrath of powerful bishops and abbots. King Ethelbald, for all his earthly power, was about to learn this lesson the hard way. He was a man of paradox, a brilliant strategist who built an empire, yet a man whose personal life was marked by a stunning lack of restraint. He was a king who could conquer kingdoms, but could not conquer his own base desires. And it was this fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to his demise. While Ethelbald's early reign was a period of undisputed success, a dark undercurrent of moral decay soon began to define his rule. Chroniclers of the time, such as St. Boniface, wrote of Ethelbald's depraved lust and his alleged violation of nuns and the sanctity of monasteries. This wasn't merely a matter of gossip. It was a profound crisis of legitimacy. A king's power was believed to be divinely sanctioned, and such acts were seen as a direct affront to God, eroding the very foundation of his authority. The whispers of his licentiousness began to grow louder, creating a dangerous tension between his personal behavior and his public duties. The central problem that sealed his fate, however, was a specific act of breathtaking arrogance. The story goes that Ethelbald became infatuated with a nun, a woman who had taken a holy vow of celibacy and dedicated her life to God. In a move that shocked the religious and political establishment alike, he declared his intention to cast aside all custom and religious law and force her into marriage. This wasn't a secret affair. It was an open and public challenge to the power of the church. It wasn't just a political miscalculation. It was an act of personal hubris that threatened to tear apart the delicate balance of power in his kingdom. But why would a king with so much to lose risk it all for one woman? Was it true love, an obsession, or a final desperate act of a man who believed himself to be above all laws? Whatever the reason, this act of sacrilege created a powerful enemy within his own court and, as we will soon see, led to a brutal and unexpected end. The events of 757 AD were a culmination of decades of festering resentment. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles, though often sparse on detail, mark a decisive moment. King Ethelbald was treacherously murdered at night by his own bodyguards at the royal residence of Seckington. The official account, though thin, paints a picture of a personal, close-quarters assassination. This wasn't a battle or a public execution, it was a betrayal in the dark. The phrase, "by his own bodyguards," is particularly loaded, implying a complete breakdown of the loyalty upon which a king's power was built. The death of the king was not followed by a period of mourning, but by a power vacuum. The speed with which events unfolded suggests a pre-existing plot. Almost immediately after Ethelbald's death, a man named Bornred seized the throne. Who was Bornred? The chronicles are frustratingly silent, describing him only as someone who held it a little while and unhappily. This sudden grab for power raises a crucial question. Was Bornred one of the bodyguards who committed the murder, or was he the mastermind who used the king's disgraced guards as pawns? His swift ascent and equally swift downfall at the hands of Offa, a distant kinsman of Ethelbald, adds another layer of intrigue. Offa's rise to power suggests he was either a long-time rival or a man who saw an opportunity in the chaos to avenge his kinsman and claim the crown. The story of the nun, though not explicitly mentioned in the brief accounts of the assassination, serves as the vital emotional core of the narrative. It explains why Ethelbald's guards might have been willing to betray their sworn duty. To men who lived and died by codes of honor and piety, a king who would so brazenly defile a sacred religious figure was no longer worthy of their loyalty. The act wasn't just a political or religious offense, it was a deeply personal one, turning his closest protectors against him. It's in this human element, the story of a powerful man's fall from grace due to a single reckless act, that the true drama of Ethelbald's death lies, transforming a dry historical record into a tale of shocking betrayal. The assassination of Ethelbald is a classic historical puzzle, with multiple theories vying to explain the truth behind the brief, chilling account. Theory number 1, the personal revenge theory. This is the most sensational and widely circulated theory, rooted in the chronicled accounts of Ethelbald's depravity. The theory posits that the assassination was not a political conspiracy, but an act of moral outrage. The king's bodyguards, serving as his closest protectors, were likely witness to his abuses and his infamous plan to marry the nun. In a deeply religious society, such an act could have been seen as the final, unforgivable sin. Driven by a sense of divine justice or personal disgust, they took it upon themselves to end his tyrannical rule. The strength of this theory lies in its emotional weight. It explains the specific detail of the murder being at the hands of his bodyguards. The weakness, however, is the lack of explicit evidence linking the nun incident directly to the assassination in the surviving chronicles. Theory number 2, the political conspiracy theory. This theory argues that the assassination was a calculated political move, with the moral outrage serving as a convenient cover. The chief suspect is Bornred, the man who seized the throne immediately after the murder. The swiftness of his ascent and the lack of a clear challenge to his initial claim suggest a prepared plot. It's plausible that Bornred or his supporters either bribed Ethelbald's guards or were themselves part of the group that carried out the deed. In this narrative, the stories of Ethelbald's moral decay were simply propaganda used to justify the coup and make Bornred's usurpation more palatable to the populace and the church. The key evidence supporting this theory is the immediate power vacuum filled by Bjornred. The counter-argument is that Bornred's reign was short-lived and unhappy, suggesting that even if he orchestrated the coup, he lacked the full support of the nobility and was quickly ousted by the more powerful Offa. Theory number 3, the divine retribution theory. This theory is less about the human actors and more about a religious interpretation of the events. It presents Ethelbald's death as a punishment from God for his sinful life. This view was popular among contemporary religious scholars and chroniclers who believed that a king's fortunes were directly tied to his piety. Ethelbald's defeat by the West Saxons shortly before his death and his ultimate assassination could be seen as God's will. This theory isn't mutually exclusive with the others. Divine retribution could have simply worked through the actions of the king's disgruntled bodyguards. While the political conspiracy theory has strong circumstantial evidence, the most compelling and plausible explanation is a synthesis of the political and personal. The official story of Ethelbald's abuses, particularly the nun incident, was likely a genuine source of deep-seated anger and moral outrage among his own men. This personal betrayal provided the perfect opportunity for a political rival, like Bornred. He wouldn't have had to convince the bodyguards to act out of pure political ambition. He could have simply encouraged and facilitated a deed they were already prepared to commit out of disgust and a desire for revenge. Thus, Ethelbald's assassination was likely not a single event, but a perfect storm, a convergence of a tyrant's depravity and a rival's ambition, all culminating in a violent end that was both a personal betrayal and a political coup. Ultimately, the murder of King Ethelbald of Mercia was not just a historical event, but a chilling lesson in the limits of power. The evidence, though fragmented, suggests that his downfall was a perfect storm of personal hubris and political ambition. The official story, that he was murdered by his own bodyguards, was almost certainly true, but the motive was far more complex than simple moral outrage. The king's depravity, specifically his sacrilegious act involving the nun, created an atmosphere of disgust and disloyalty that a political rival, likely Bornred, was all too willing to exploit. Thus, Ethelbald's death was both a private act of revenge and a calculated political coup, a moment where personal and public forces converged to bring down a once mighty king. The story of King Ethelbald serves as a stark reminder that even in an age of kings and divine right, power is not absolute. He may have conquered kingdoms and held nations in his sway, but his reign was ultimately undone by his own unchecked arrogance and his complete disregard for the moral and religious laws that bound his society together. His life and death challenge us to consider, what happens when a leader's character becomes so divorced from their public duty that they forfeit the very loyalty that keeps them in power? And is the assassin's blade, however brutal, sometimes seen as a form of justice when all other recourse has failed?